The Australian Financial Review.
Up until the last few weeks, Oleg Vornik was everywhere.
I spoke to their CEO, Oleg Vornik.
Oleg Vornik with us
Joined
today.
by Oleg Vornik, the CEO of DroneShield.
Oleg Vornik, welcome to...
Hi, Oleg Vornik, the CEO of DroneShield. Oleg, great to have you on the show.
Vornik has a compelling tale to tell. A maths whiz who fled Russia, joined a drone technology startup, took over as CEO, and built it into a $5.8 billion company.
We're seeing strong momentum for our counter-drone products right across the world. And the business is continuing to grow.
It's a story he's told over and over again. But this month, he went quiet.
But shares of DroneShield plummeted by more than 30% after its CEO Oleg Vornik sold 15 million of his shares in the company. We asked him why, but he hasn't returned our calls.
After selling every one of his shares for $50 million, at the same time as his chairman offloaded his entire stake, Vornik went to ground, leaving everyone scrambling to understand just what the hell is going on.
Early in the morning, the texts and the messages and the broken notes were flying around. What had just happened? Had these guys really done what the screen was showing them? Had they really just sold everything straight away?
Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. This week, senior reporter Jonathan Shapiro on the rise of DroneShield, why its CEO just dumped all his stock, and whether the company can restore the faith. It's Thursday, November 27. Hi, Johnny. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Hi, Lisa. Always a pleasure.
Before we talk about the last few weeks and those mysterious share sales, tell us about DroneShield. What does it do and who is Oleg Vornik?
Oleg Vornik really is the face of DroneShield, and he's a very sort of colourful, passionate and ambitious character. I don't know him at all, but even I call him Oleg. Everyone seems to be very familiar with him because he's such an extensive communicator. Oleg's history and story was captured by Rachel Bolton, who wrote a terrific feature on Oleg in our Boss section in October. He was born in Saratov, Russia. He left the country as a teenager, as a refugee.
You have to be conscripted to the Russian military when you basically finish school. And now you would go to Ukraine. Back then was the late 90s. You would go to Chechnya.
Moved to New Zealand. He was a bit of a genius. He, he competed in the Maths Olympiad when he was a child.
Came to New Zealand when I was a teen. And so I was like in New Zealand Maths Olympiad team. I did a maths degree and, started working.
He was a numbers guy and a trading guy. His early career, he originally was in trading and ultimately found his way into banking. But I think he described it as, he felt himself to be a glorified secretary in that finance career. And he found himself as a CFO of DroneShield.
This came along and I'm like, this is pretty cool. The detection and taking down drones, pretty good idea.
This is a company founded by two US engineers. He was a CFO, but not long after the company listed on the share market, he was upgraded from the CFO to the CEO. And he really took to that with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy. He was very committed to, selling the DroneShield story and explaining what it does.
And what does it do?
Effectively, it zaps drones out the sky. Now, obviously, it's not as simple as that.
The core to the detection is the radio frequency. So you're listening for the connection from the controller to the drone.
But the technology invented by these two US engineers is to, detect drones through their radio frequency and then disrupt the radio frequency so that the drones are effectively disabled.
We can listen to that and detect the drone and triangulate its location and even sometimes location of the pilot.
And it does that either through handheld devices like a zap gun or mounted systems that interfere with the radio frequency of drones and, disables them or disarms them. And that's the technology that they had. They tried to sell it to the military world and with limited success. The chairman explained how they went to Canberra to try and explain the technology and why it was needed. Defence people in Canberra said, come back to us when there's a crisis. And lo and behold, there is a crisis.
Ukraine woke to explosions around the capital, Kiev. It was the same across the country.
Targeting military installations, including air bases housing fighter jets.
Ukraine was hit by the largest aerial attack of the war so far.
I think, Lisa, the two big developments in the story of DroneShield are the outbreak of the Ukraine-Russia war, and that really alerted the public and pretty much everyone about the use of drones and how warfare had changed and how drones had become an integral part of warfare.
800 drones launched by Russia at Ukraine. This the largest aerial attack since the war began.
The Russians deployed drones, the Ukrainians deployed counter-drones.
See how close the drones get to the aircraft. You can see at one point they sort of fly under the fuselage of the aircraft. You can see
the whole idea of a front line changed when armies are flying unmanned aerial threats over onto enemy lines.
Because of constant drone attacks, Ukrainian units remain in their positions for weeks, sometimes even months.
And then for the company and the business, probably the pivotal moment was in 2023, mid-2023. DroneShield got a $33 million order from the US government. And that validated not only the technology, but the viability of the company. Ever since then, it's been a legitimate company that's attracted a lot of attention.
And at that stage, Johnny, DroneShield was already listed on the stock exchange, and its shareholders were mainly retail investors rather than institutions. How did it come to be one of the most talked about stocks on the ASX this year?
DroneShield listed on the Australian share market in 2017 with little fanfare, but gradually, more and more investors started to, become attracted to the story. We now sort of use the term meme stocks, and even Oleg has used this term too, when he's found that his company has attracted a lot of attention from retail investors and perhaps less so from, more conservative, storied institutional investors. It became a really red-hot retail investing story this year because of a combination of events. So you had, the Ukraine war. There's been drone attacks in airports in Europe and, crossing borders. The listed defence sector has been on an absolute boom this year.
Investors have piled into Australian defence stocks, with DroneShield, EOS and Nostell all seeing their share prices soar.
And that's driven primarily by US President Donald Trump's global push to get his allies, or America's allies, to increase more of their defence spending.
And a push from US President Donald Trump has seen NATO members commit to dramatically boost their defence budgets.
And we saw a really big moment when Germany announced that they would, spend hundreds of billions of dollars on their own defence.
Germany's voting on proposals to remove restrictions on borrowing so it can significantly increase its defence budget.
And ever since then, defence stocks have been on an absolute tear. And this all sort of played into DroneShield's hands, and they were winning contracts. They were selling their technology around the world, so their sales were going up. That brought with it momentum and brought with it retail shareholders, and it was against a backdrop of, a structural enthusiasm for the sector. Now, the company was also pitching to investors that it's not just about defence and about selling the technology to armies and fighting forces. There was also a civilian use for it. For example, protecting civilian infrastructure like a stadium or an airport from unwarranted drone incursions. So, there was a wider use for this technology. And that was all part of Oleg's sales pitch. He's been very proactive. He's been enthusiastically telling the DroneShield story to anyone that will listen, and he's very much tied up in the story. And he gave that interview to the AFR's Boss magazine where he talked about what it was like growing up as a child in Russia, escaping conscription and eventually coming to Australia via New Zealand and building a $5.8 billion company on the ASX. And there's some terrific photos of Oleg holding that very sleek metal gun-like device to the sky, pointing at the drones. Now that story came out on October 10th. Which happened to coincide with the peak in the share price.
One of the most exciting ASX stories in recent years has been the evolution of DroneShield.
It really was a peak moment for DroneShield.
Year to date, you're talking about gains of more than 500%.
If you're an investor and you put money in DroneShield just at the start of the year, which isn't even that long ago, if you put in $10,000, you were sitting on an $80,000 profit, you're sitting on $90,000. And if you'd bought a couple of years ago, your $10,000 would be worth $400,000. So some real money that, retail investors who bought the story and found the whole idea of the technology and the need for it compelling and put some money behind it, they've done very well. And I think that's why people, despite crypto and property, people still love the Australian share market. They still feel like they can make a lot of money relatively quickly, and DroneShield sort of encapsulated that. And the contracts are rolling in, and on November 4th, the company announced that Oleg and its directors had met their target. They had a target to earn performance shares if they could hit $200 million of sales over a 12-month period. the auditors came in and gave it the tick, and the shares were issued.
So Oleg is on a high, DroneShield is kicking goals, investors are making money, and then the following week it all comes crashing down. What happened?
So the first indication that something was amiss happened on Monday, the 10th of November, when shares in DroneShield were paused for trading. It was about shortly after 11:30 a.m. Just before market open, DroneShield put out a very positive announcement. They said that they had a $7.6 million contract to deliver their handheld systems to the US government, and the share price opened higher. All was looking good, but at 11:30 the shares were paused, and then shortly after that DroneShield admitted that they'd made an error, that this contract was part of something they'd already announced, so they told the ASX to withdraw that previous statement, which is very unusual, very strange, put something positive, then retract it. At the time it raised some eyebrows. It was seen as a bit of a mishap, but nothing more than that. One broker was saying it was a yellow flag, not a red flag.
Okay.
So strange, but not a catastrophe. And if you still believed in DroneShield, it wasn't a thesis breaker. It's something to be aware of, but not something to sort of get too hung up over. But Wednesday evening, brokers had something to get really hung up over. DroneShield did actually deliver their thesis breaker. After 7:30, which is quite a while after the markets closed at 4 p.m, 3 filings hit the ASX, and they were of Vornik, the chairman, Peter James, and a director, Jethro Marks. It revealed that they had sold all their shares. Vornik and James had sold every share they'd just been issued as part of his performance rights. Oleg made $50 million cashing out. Peter James, $12.4 million. Jethro Marks, not as much, about $5 million of shares. And everyone was pretty shocked, Early in the morning, the texts and the messages and the broker notes were flying around. What had just happened? Had these guys really done what the screen was showing them? Had they really just sold everything straight away? The market took it as a massive sign of a lack of confidence, and the shares just plunged 30%.
Shares of DroneShield plummeted by more than 30% after its CEO Oleg Vornik sold 15 million of his shares in the company for $49.5 million. We asked him why, but he hasn't returned our calls.
And it's since come out that they sold their shares between the 6th and the 12th of November. Now, the interesting thing here is that they were selling up to and after Monday, the 10th of November, which is the day that DroneShield put out that incorrect contract announcement, which actually sent the share price up 10% before trading was suspended.
And as you pointed out in your reporting, Johnny, while there was a lot of surprise at this move to dump all their shares, it had actually happened before.
Yes, and that's the most sort of intriguing thing about what had happened. Obviously, people are up in arms. They can't believe the directors, the CEO and the chairman have all sold their shares. But it has happened before. I mean, in February 2024, the almost identical thing happened. The same 3 directors sold the same proportion of shares straight after they were issued. So, one experienced investor, Matthew Kidman, described it as, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So what it brings back is the fact that Oleg, the CEO, hasn't held any shares in this company, So normally when a CEO doesn't own shares, it's taken as a negative. Why doesn't the CEO want to be invested in his own company? Why has he or she got no skin in the game? And interestingly, Vornik was asked about this in a Bloomberg interview. He told Bloomberg he was pretty relaxed and unfazed about missing out on this extraordinary rally, because when he did sell his shares in February 2024, the share price was 93 cents. It got as high as $6.60. So, if you'd sort of taken him selling out and not owning shares as a signal, you would have missed out on a lot of profits. So, ironically, some retail shareholders saw it that way too. The day after Oleg sold, they were like, well, if we'd followed him out last time, we would have missed out on all these profits.
But there was no explanation. Maybe Oleg could have pointed that out.
Yes. What was unusual for a person like Oleg, who, is always on the front foot, always talking, always responding, companies always putting out statements, he went very quiet. We struggled to get a response from him. Me and my colleagues that have been covering the story, it was very slow in responding. Yeah, we were sort of left to speculate on a whole bunch of things. I mean, the immediate thing that reporters and shareholders and brokers wanted to find out was what happened on that Monday when they made that mistake. Now, it almost seems so unusual that it was likely to be an error. It's hard to imagine that people are so brazen that they would do something like that without it being a total accident. But still, people wanted that cleared up. So there were a whole lot of questions that we and others wanted answers. And on Thursday of last week, we found out that the ASX wanted answers too.
As we hurtle towards the end of the year, I'd like to say hello and thank you. I'm Alex Gow, Head of Audio at the Financial Review. The Fin is just one of several excellent podcasts we make, and I encourage you to check them all out. From our weekly business podcast, Chanticleer, where James Thompson and Anthony MacDonald discuss their biggest columns of the week, to How I Made It and 15 Minutes with the Boss, where we speak to the biggest names in corporate Australia. Thank you again, and we look forward to bringing you more from Lisa Murray and the newsroom in 2026.
We're talking about DroneShield and the decision by its CEO and chairman to sell out of all of their stock that has left a huge cloud hanging over the company. Johnny, the ASX demanded answers from DroneShield about those share sales last week. What did they say?
So Lisa, when there's a large movement in the stock, the ASX, as the stock market operator, is always concerned. They always want to be sure that the share price is moving based on new information, that there's nothing that the company, positive or negative, was aware of and should have released earlier. That was the premise or the basis for questions that they'd sent DroneShield, because, that morning after the share sales, the stock fell 30%. So, the market was clearly reacting to something. And DroneShield had to explain that really there was no new information other than the fact that all the directors had decided to sell all their shares, and other investors in the company were taking that as a signal. So there was nothing new. And in the 16-page response to the ASX, DroneShield revealed that some of the shares were actually sold before and after the incorrect statement was made.
And after that incorrect statement, the shares did spike 10%.
In the period when that information out there hadn't been corrected, the shares went up 10% on the view that there was a new contract that the company had won and that their revenues had gone up. So they were selling on that day, which is controversial.
Yeah.
In that ASX statement, the company made it clear that there wasn't an agreement to coordinate the sale of their shares and that they all sought approval separately. They didn't know each other were selling and the extent to which they were selling. What's also interesting is that directors need approval before selling shares, so they all sort of had to ask each other for approval, which is another bizarre feature of the events that unfolded. But they did admit that, they could lift their game in certain respects. They could lift their game around their disclosure requirements, that erroneous report. They pledged to bring in advisors on a whole range of things to, fix the disclosure. And they had hired media advisors as well to manage this crisis.
And so this written response to the ASX a week ago, that was the first time we'd heard from the company, Oleg and the chairman about why they sold their shares. They then scheduled some investor briefings. How did they handle those, and what was the market response?
Well, Lisa, while the company was dealing with the ASX, they went very quiet, and as best we can interpret, they felt that they needed to provide an official response to the regulators before they started engaging with media and investors. And that response was quite detailed because the questions that they were forced to respond to were very specific. Now, there was an eagerly anticipated broker call scheduled with DroneShield's house broker, Bell Potter, for Friday morning, and everyone was very interested and keen to dial in just to see what was going on. But the evening before, that was cancelled. And then on Monday, DroneShield scheduled another investor briefing, and that was hosted by Jefferies, which is a international investment bank. But what we're told by those that dialed into the call is that it was very scripted and controlled. questions were pre-submitted, probably vetted. There was no media allowed on the call. But from those shareholders and investors that did dial into that call, the message that was relayed to us is that Oleg and the company felt that there was nothing particularly out of the ordinary. Oleg had worked very hard on DroneShield over a very long period of time. He'd done so at great personal risk. In fact, he actually spoke on the call about the threats to the lives of other CEOs of other defense companies, and this was not a job for the faint-hearted. So he'd grown their revenues from $50 million to $200 million, and this was his reward, which was all agreed and approved by shareholders, and that the share sales shouldn't be seen as a signal of his view of the company's prospects or his commitment to DroneShield. And as for that Monday statement that had to be retracted, the company said that this was a one-off. It never happened before in their history and they didn't think it would happen again.
Mhm.
But they would take measures to make sure that that would remain a one-off. So they'd put extra policies and procedures in places. So that was the first time we'd heard from them and broken their silence. But in that interim period, the narrative of DroneShield had completely flipped. The air and the enthusiasm had come out of it. It had become very controversial.
Mhm.
The briefing did have a positive effect on the share price. I mean, stopped falling for a start, so that was positive. And then on Tuesday, it was a normal operating procedure resumed for DroneShield. They announced a $5.6 million contract win out of Europe, and the shares jumped by about 15%. And then the momentum carried through on Wednesday, where the share price rose another 15%, so up nearly 30% over the course of the week. And it was a case of hedge funds selling, but mom and pop investors enthusiastically buying again.
Mhm.
And what's remarkable is that ComSec, which is by far the biggest retail share trading platform in the country, they always reveal their most traded stocks during the week.
Mhm.
And DroneShield was number one by a long way. It's the undisputed most heavily traded retail stock. And interesting, there were more investors buying DroneShield than they were buying and selling Commonwealth Bank, which is
Wow.
the market's biggest stock. So, so there's a relief rally underway. The retail investors are as engaged as ever, but it's definitely been a very damaging month for DroneShield, and there are a lot of lingering questions about the company.
And those questions, Johnny, they're not just about the share sales. Questions are also being asked about DroneShield's technology and its ability to keep up with the evolving battlefield. And this was all happening in the background to the drama of those share sales.
Yes, Lisa, I think once the governance storm settles and, the share trading volatility abates, this will be the existential question for DroneShield, which is, does its product work? Can it continue to work? And can the company continue to innovate in a highly, highly competitive industry? And our defense reporter, Andrew Tillett, who's now based in London, he's been following the company quite closely. He's met Oleg. He's spoken to military insiders. And the common feedback he is getting is that its systems are being superseded in the battlefield. And there are doubts about whether it remains a superior technology and whether those who the technology is being used against have figured out how to counter it. More drones are autonomous, so they aren't communicating, which means it's hard to use their communication channel as a way to bring them down if they're autonomous. A week is a long time in defense, so you have to be innovating and responding to technology all the time. So global warfare's absolutely changed. Drones are now like artillery. Countries just fire off thousands or millions of them. Some of them hit, some of them don't. How they use is changing, and how to defend against them is also changing. So that's the question: is can DroneShield innovate? The other interesting question is an increasing share of their sales are going to middlemen. So they call them indirect channels. So they're not selling directly to a military; they're selling to a distributor. And who are those distributors? They've said that that every entity they sell to is verified by the Australian government, so that it's not getting into the wrong hands. But it does raise questions when they've had this ramp up in sales that about 80% of all the sales over the recent half-year period were to distributors. Oleg is ever enthusiastic. The last time the company presented to shareholders in late October, he was adamant. He says it's not guidance, but he has a personal ambition and he believes he can get to $1 billion of sales in 5 years, which is 5 times the $200 million that got him his target. So if you believe him, the company could be 5 times larger in 5 years' time. So he's still selling the story pretty hard and he still remains optimistic about its prospects.
So, Johnny, a final question then. What do you think happens from here for DroneShield, and what are the lessons?
Well, Lisa, I think the most immediate issue that DroneShield has to deal with is that it has to restore confidence. It lost a lot of confidence over the last few weeks. The share markets lost faith with the directors, with its governance, the actions of its CEO. They really need to get on the front foot and explain what they've done and win back their trust. They've got a lot of work to do there. Oleg will be out there talking to as many investors as he can, explaining the logic of his actions. There may be more regulatory fallout. The ASX may have more questions. ASIC may have more questions too. So time will tell if there's any further fallout. But yeah, what is clear is, the board does really need to lift its game. And we've seen it time and time again with companies that have really good prospects. They grow very quickly. They win a lot of investors who want to buy into their story and believe that, this is a great business. But we don't see the governance and the behavior move with the company. So it's almost like a crossroads. These companies either, when they reach a certain point, they either have to become more professional, understand their investors better, understand what the market will accept and what it won't accept, and adjust. And if they don't, then, they're at risk of sort of really alienating investors and making it very hard to raise money, which would be a shame. Because, Lisa, we do want Australian companies to do well and prosper, and we want them to do well and prosper on the share market so we can all be a part of it. Ordinary Australians can share in this wealth creation. And we don't want our stock market to be a casino. Time will tell from now on whether this is just a bump on the road and this is a great company, or if it's just yet another example of a company using the stock market to extract value rather than to create it.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you for listening to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray, with Financial Review senior reporter Jonathan Shapiro joining the podcast today. The Fin is produced by Alex Gow and Mandy Coulin. Fiona Buffini is head of premium content. Our theme is by Alex Gow. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and share it with a friend, as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.